February 21, 1965. The Audubon Ballroom, Washington Heights. 400 people watched Malcolm X collapse on stage. 3 gunmen fired 21 shots. 2 made it to the street. The third never reached the door. Talmadge Hayer was 22 years old. Nation of Islam foot soldier. He'd emptied his .45 automatic into Malcolm's chest from 15 feet away. Standard protocol said run. Blend into the chaos. Disappear before police arrived. He ran. The crowd was screaming. The exit was 30 feet away. Clear path. 30 seconds maximum. Bumpy Johnson sat in the back row. He'd come alone. No bodyguards. No entourage. Just an old man in a dark suit who'd watched the whole thing unfold with the stillness of someone who'd seen this before. When Hayer bolted for the door, Bumpy didn't chase him. He stood up. Slowly. Deliberately. And the crowd understood what the gunman didn't. That exit wasn't an escape route anymore. Malcolm X and Bumpy Johnson weren't friends. They were something more complicated. Malcolm preached revolution. Bumpy ran Harlem's shadow economy. One wanted to dismantle the system. The other had perfected living within it. But they shared something fundamental. Both understood power without illusion. Malcolm had left the Nation of Islam 8 months earlier. The split wasn't quiet. Death threats came weekly. Firebombs. Surveillance. Everyone knew something was coming. The question wasn't if. It was when. Malcolm's house in Queens had been firebombed a week earlier. His family barely escaped. He told reporters he knew who'd ordered it. Told them he had maybe weeks left. He said this calmly. The way someone discusses the weather. Bumpy had watched Malcolm's evolution closely. Watched him transform from nation spokesman to independent voice. Watched him become more dangerous to the establishment precisely because he'd stopped preaching separation and started preaching coalition. Black, white, brown, all oppressed people working together. This made him intolerable to multiple organizations. Bumpy had people throughout Harlem. Collectors, operators, street ears. Information flowed to him the way water flows downhill. He'd heard whispers about the Audubon. Heard the nation was planning something permanent. Heard they'd recruited young soldiers who believed killing Malcolm was righteous work. The whispers had specifics. 3 shooters. All former nation members. All convinced Malcolm was a traitor who'd abandoned the faith. All willing to die for the cause if necessary. Bumpy didn't warn Malcolm. That wasn't how this worked. Malcolm had made his choice. Had known the cost. Had walked onto that stage anyway. Besides, Malcolm had his own intelligence network. He knew what was coming. He told his wife Betty to stay home. Told his security to stand down. Told the world through his final speeches that he accepted his fate. But Bumpy came to witness. To be present. To see how it played out. This was important. In Harlem's structure, presence meant something. Being there when things happened created obligation. Created responsibility. Created the foundation for what came after. What he witnessed required a response. Not because Malcolm was a friend. Not because of politics or ideology. Because of something older than both. A code that predated organizations and movements and everything that came with them. You could kill a man in Harlem. That was understood. The streets had rules about violence. About territory. About respect. But you didn't kill a man who dedicated his life to his people and then run away like it was just another hit. You didn't murder someone that's significant and expect to blend back into the neighborhood like nothing happened. The Nation of Islam had made a calculation. They'd assumed Harlem would accept Malcolm's death as internal business. Movement politics. Not their concern. This was the error. Harlem didn't belong to the nation. It belonged to itself. And Malcolm, whatever his organization, had become part of Harlem's fabric. His murder in a Harlem ballroom made it Harlem's business. The ballroom itself held significance. The Audubon wasn't some random venue. It was a community space, where Harlem held meetings, dances, celebrations, where families brought their children on weekends. The nation had desecrated community space with political assassination. Bumpy understood this immediately. The moment the shots rang out, He knew what came next wasn't about Malcolm anymore. It was about what Harlem allowed to happen inside its borders. Hayer shoved through the panicked crowd. Women screaming. Men diving for cover. Bodies pressed against bodies. He kept his gun visible. Kept moving toward the exit. The chaos was perfect cover. Exactly what they'd planned. Create confusion. Disappear in the panic. 3 shooters, 3 different exits. Impossible to stop all of them. Norman Butler and Talmadge Johnson, his accomplices, had already made it out the side doors. Hayer could hear sirens, but they were distant. Still minutes away. He had time. He was 20 feet away when someone tripped him. Not tackled. Tripped. A leg extended at exactly the right moment. Hayer went down hard. His gun skittered across the floor. He scrambled to his feet, reached for another weapon. The crowd turned on him. This was instinct. Collective rage focused on a single target. Hands grabbed him. Fists connected. Someone had a chair. The beating was immediate and thorough. A man named Gene Roberts, later revealed as an undercover NYPD officer, tried to perform CPR on Malcolm. Others rushed the stage. Some chased after the other shooters. But most stayed focused on Hayer, because Hayer had fallen, had shown vulnerability, had become catchable. Hayer covered his head, tried to fight back, tried to explain he was just following orders. The crowd didn't care about orders. Someone kicked his ribs. Another stomped on his hand. A woman hit him with her purse repeatedly, screaming about her children being in the building. The violence was pure, unfiltered, the kind that comes from witnessing something unforgivable and having a target immediately available. Bumpy watched from his position near the back. Didn't join, didn't stop it, just watched. The beating continued for maybe 45 seconds. Long enough to break Hayer's leg. Long enough to ensure he wasn't going anywhere. Then Bumpy moved. He walked through the crowd like it wasn't there. People saw him coming and stepped aside. Not because he asked. Because his presence carried weight that transcended the moment's chaos. He reached Hayer. Looked down at the young man bleeding on the floor. Hayer's face was already swelling. His leg bent wrong. He was crying. Begging. Saying he was sorry. Saying he didn't mean it. Saying things that contradicted each other because pain and fear make people incoherent. Bumpy crouched beside him. Close enough that only Hayer could hear. You're going to stay right here. 5 words. Delivered without threat. Without anger. Just fact. Hayer tried to crawl. Bumpy didn't touch him. Didn't need to. He simply stood and positioned himself between Hayer and the exit. A physical barrier that communicated finality. The crowd backed off. The beating stopped. Not because they were satisfied. Because Bumpy's presence changed what was happening. This wasn't mob justice anymore. This was something else. Something the neighborhood recognized and respected even in their rage. Several men moved to stand with Bumpy. They didn't ask if he needed help. Didn't discuss what they were doing. They simply formed a semicircle around Hayer. A human wall between the killer and freedom. This was Harlem's structure revealing itself. Bumpy hadn't given orders. Hadn't recruited these men. They'd simply understood what was happening and joined it. Because the moment required it. Because Bumpy's positioning had created a statement they recognized and endorsed. Sirens approached. Police response time in Harlem was usually slow. 15-20 minutes for anything short of cop shooting. Today they were fast. Political assassination speeds things up. White media would be all over this. City Hall would demand answers. Pressure would flow downward through the department. Hayer heard them. Started calculating. Maybe the police would be safer than the crowd. Maybe prison was better than this. Maybe protective custody. Maybe witness protection if he cooperated. He looked up at Bumpy. Searched for mercy. For some indication that the old man would let him move. Would let him crawl toward the approaching sirens. Would allow him those final 15 feet to potential safety. Bumpy's expression didn't change. Didn't harden. Didn't soften. Just remained fixed. Inevitable. This was the moment Hayer understood. The 30 seconds he'd needed to reach the door had already passed. The window had closed. Not because the crowd had beaten him. Not because his leg was broken. Because Bumpy Johnson had decided the exit was no longer available. And in Harlem, when Bumpy Johnson decided something, it became reality. Police burst through the doors. Guns drawn. Shouting commands. The crowd scattered. Hayer lay on the floor exactly where Bumpy had told him to stay. Bumpy walked toward the stage. Where Malcolm's body lay. Where Betty Shabazz was screaming. Where history had just turned. He didn't look back at Hayer. Didn't need to. The police dragged Hayer toward their vehicle. The crowd pressed in. Angry. Wanting blood. Officers formed a barrier. Barely holding the line. Bumpy stood on the ballroom steps. Smoking a cigarette. Watching the transfer. People from the neighborhood approached him. Asked what he knew. Asked what would happen next. Asked if the nation would send more killers. He didn't answer. Just smoked. Just watched. One of Harlem's street captains pushed through. Man named Terrence. Ran numbers on 145th. Had worked for Bumpy for 12 years. He leaned close. The other two got away. Word is they're heading to a safe house in Newark. Bumpy took a long drag. Exhaled slowly. They'll surface eventually. You want us to find them? No. Terrence looked confused. But they killed Malcolm. They should. They'll be arrested within a week. Bumpy's voice was matter-of-fact. FBI already knows who they are. This was too public. Too many witnesses. They're finished whether we do anything or not. Then why make sure this one stayed? This was the question that mattered. Bumpy looked at Terrence. Then at the police car where Hayer sat bleeding and broken. Then back at the ballroom where Malcolm had died. Because someone needed to be held accountable in the exact place where it happened. In front of the people who witnessed it. Not arrested quietly later. Not processed through some system downtown. Here. Now. Immediately. Terrence absorbed this. You think that matters? I think it's the only thing that matters. Another man approached. Younger. Maybe 25. Angry. We should burn down every nation mosque in the city. Tonight. Make them pay for what they did. Bumpy turned to him. And then what? Then they know we don't accept this. They already know. The whole world knows. Burning buildings doesn't add to that knowledge. It just creates more funerals. The young man wasn't satisfied. So we do nothing? Malcolm's dead and we made sure one of his killers faced immediate justice. We demonstrated that you can't commit murder in Harlem and walk away. We sent a message that's going to resonate longer than any fire. Bumpy's voice stayed level. Violence for violence just proves Malcolm died for nothing. That everything he said about finding better ways was empty words. The police car pulled away. Hayer's face pressed against the window. His eyes found Bumpy one last time. No defiance left. No righteousness. Just recognition that he'd miscalculated something fundamental about the territory he'd chosen to commit murder in. Bumpy dropped his cigarette. Crushed it under his shoe. Malcolm knew they were coming. He walked on that stage anyway. That takes a kind of courage most people don't have. The least we can do is make sure one of the men who killed him didn't get to walk away clean. Terrence nodded. Started to leave. Stopped. The nation's going to have a problem with this. They're going to say you had no right to interfere. The nation, Bumpy said quietly, should have thought about that before they did this in Harlem. This was the declaration that changed everything. Not a threat. Not a warning. Just a statement of territorial authority so absolute it didn't require elaboration. Malcolm X's murder was national news. Political earthquake. Movement catastrophe. But in Harlem it was also something simpler. It was a line crossed, and Bumpy Johnson had drawn the response. Betty Shabazz emerged from the ballroom, supported by friends. Her face was devastated. For children at home. One more on the way. 38 years old and now a widow. She saw Bumpy standing on the steps. Their eyes met briefly. She didn't speak. Didn't acknowledge him beyond that momentary connection. But something passed between them. Recognition. Understanding. The knowledge that in the chaos and horror of that afternoon, Someone had ensured at least one measure of immediate justice. She got into a car, drove away. Bumpy remained on the steps. More people arrived. News crews, FBI agents, city officials. The machinery of investigation and spectacle grinding into motion. Bumpy watched it all. Catalogued who arrived when, who asked what questions, who seemed genuinely shocked versus who'd clearly known this was coming. Information. Always information. Because information was currency and currency was power. A young reporter approached. White kid from one of the downtown papers. Probably 23. Nervous. Sir. Did you witness the shooting? I was here. Did you see who did it? Everyone saw. Do you know why someone would want Malcolm X dead? Bumpy looked at him. Really looked at him. The kid was earnest. Probably thought he was covering history. Probably imagined his story would explain everything. Malcolm X spent his life telling uncomfortable truths. That makes powerful people nervous. Nervous people do desperate things. You understand that, and you'll understand everything else. But specifically, was it the Nation of Islam? The FBI? Who? Write your story, son. But remember that every assassination is actually a dozen different murders at once. Different motives. Different beneficiaries. You'll chase conspiracy theories for 20 years and never get a clean answer. Sometimes the simple truth is enough. What's the simple truth? Malcolm knew what was coming and accepted it. The men who killed him thought they'd escape. One of them learned different. That's the story. The rest is just details. The reporter scribbled notes. Didn't understand he was being given something more valuable than conspiracy. A framework. A way to understand power and consequence that would serve him better than any expose. Bumpy walked down the steps. Headed toward 166th Street. Toward home. Toward the quiet space where he could process what had happened and what would come next. Behind him, the Audubon Ballroom transformed into a crime scene. Evidence markers. Photography. The technical apparatus of investigation. Malcolm's blood still on the stage. His body already removed, but his presence lingering in ways that would outlast all of them. Talmadge Hayer was convicted of first-degree murder in 1966. Sentenced to life. He confessed in 1977. Named his accomplices. Confirmed what everyone already knew. Norman Butler and Thomas Johnson were also convicted. Both maintained their innocence. Both were likely innocent of the actual shooting, though complicit in other ways. The justice system got it approximately right. Close enough for government work. But history remembers Hayer differently than the others. Because Hayer was the one who didn't escape. The one who faced immediate consequence. The one who was held accountable in the moment, in the place, by the people who'd witnessed what he'd done. That happened because Bumpy Johnson stood between him and the door. The immediate aftermath in Harlem was tense. Nation of Islam mosques received threats. Malcolm's supporters organized. The potential for large-scale violence was real. Every night for 2 weeks, community leaders expected something to ignite. Didn't. Not because people weren't angry. Because Bumpy's response had provided a release valve. Justice had been immediate and visible. One killer caught. One killer held accountable right there, right then. It wasn't complete justice. Malcolm was still dead. But it was something. A gesture. A statement that the community hadn't simply witnessed murder passively. The Nation of Islam's influence in Harlem declined sharply after Malcolm's death. Not overnight. Not dramatically. But steadily. Quietly. The organization lost credibility in the streets. Lost the respect of people who'd once considered joining. Lost the moral authority they'd built over decades. Some of that was inevitable. Killing your most famous minister tends to have consequences. The nation hemorrhaged members throughout 1965 and 1966. Mosques that had been full on Fridays became half empty. The younger generation especially turned away. But some of it was Bumpy's response. The message he sent by ensuring Hayer stayed. By making it clear that certain actions in Harlem carried immediate weight. That you couldn't commit murder in a neighborhood and expect that neighborhood to look the other way just because your organization said it was righteous. Within 2 years, the Nation of Islam had effectively withdrawn from active organizing in Harlem. They maintained a presence, kept their mosque. But the aggressive recruitment, the street corner speeches, the visibility they'd once commanded, all of that faded. People remembered why. Bumpy never spoke publicly about that day. Never gave interviews. Never explained his reasoning. He didn't need to. Everyone who mattered understood what he'd done and why. He attended Malcolm's funeral on February 27, 1965. 27,000 people came to view the body. Lines stretched for blocks. Bumpy arrived early, before the crowds, paid his respects in private, said whatever needed saying to whoever might be listening, then left before the spectacle began. He was there, in the back, alone, just as he'd been at the Audubon. The funeral was held at the Faith Temple Church of God in Christ. Ossie Davis delivered the eulogy, called Malcolm our shining black prince. The phrase became immortal, summed up everything Malcolm had represented to Harlem, to Black America, to the world. Bumpy listened to those words, nodded slightly, then slipped out before the procession began. He lived 3 more years, relatively quiet years by his standards. The numbers operation continued. The territory remained stable. Law enforcement left him mostly alone. He'd become an institution, a figure so embedded in Harlem's structure that removing him seemed impossible and perhaps unwise. He died on July 7, 1968. Heart attack. Wells Restaurant on 7th Avenue. The same restaurant where he'd eaten lunch every Thursday for 15 years. Collapsed at his regular table. Gone before the ambulance arrived. He was 62. His funeral was smaller than Malcolm's. More private. But significant people attended. Street operators. Community leaders. Old friends and former enemies. People who understood his role in maintaining Harlem's delicate balance for 40 years. When people talk about Malcolm X's assassination today, they focus on the conspiracy theories. The FBI, the NYPD, the political forces that wanted him silenced. The recent exonerations of Butler and Johnson. The questions that remain unanswered. All of that matters. All of that's true. The full story is complex. Involves surveillance, infiltration, deliberate confusion of evidence. Involves systemic forces larger than any individual. Malcolm was dangerous to multiple power structures. His death served multiple agendas. The complete truth remains elusive. But in Harlem, they tell a different story alongside that complexity. About the 30 seconds that separated escape from capture. About an old man who understood power without illusion. About the moment someone stood between a killer and freedom and made sure justice happened immediately, in front of everyone, without delay or negotiation. They tell the story of how Bumpy Johnson made sure Talmadge Hayer never made it to the door. Not because he could stop the assassination. Not because he could bring Malcolm back. Not because he had evidence of conspiracy or special knowledge of who really ordered the hit. But because someone needed to ensure that murdering Malcolm X in Harlem had consequences in Harlem. Immediate, visible, undeniable consequences. That was the response. That was the statement. That was the moment power answered to power. The Audubon Ballroom still stands. It's been renovated, renamed, used for other purposes. But people know what happened there. The building carries memory in its walls, in its floorboards, in the space where Malcolm fell and Talmadge Hayer ran and Bumpy Johnson said no. Sometimes history hinges on 30 seconds. On the distance between a murder and an exit. On whether someone stands in that space and decides that exit is no longer available. Bumpy Johnson stood in that space. And the door stayed closed. That wasn't justice in the legal sense. Wasn't investigation or trial or systemic accountability. It was something older. Something more immediate. The kind of response that communities create when official systems fail or move too slowly or miss the point entirely. It was Harlem saying, not here, not like this, not without consequence. Bumpy Johnson didn't speak that message. He embodied it, became its physical manifestation for the 60 seconds that mattered most. And 59 years later, people still remember why.